to switch topics a little bit, focusing kind of bit on the gut health, the colon health, what you hear. Here's what I got from my mom and from the vegan community when I switched over. Oh, well, you're going to get colon cancer, and all that cholesterol is going to give you heart disease. What do you have to say about that, Dr. Shawn Baker?
Yeah, so I mean, let me address the colon cancer issue first, because so what we have is, as you probably may be aware, and many vegans point this out to me all the time, the World Health Organization in 2015 came up with a position, statement that's saying that red meat, processed meat was a class 1 carcinogen. Regular red meat was a class 2, which means probable, but not for sure. And they base that largely on epidemiologic studies, and they flat out say that. They say we have several epidemiologic studies which point to a small but consistent risk for colorectal cancer, in the populations we study. And then they point to a couple mechanistic studies which kind of say why this may be plausible, whether it's heme iron, whether it's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, whether it's heterocyclic amines, whether it's some of these other compounds, the unique meat sugars, TMAO or something like that. But none of those things ever actually showed cancer in humans. They just never, you've got some rat studies that are kind of show that. Most of the rat studies, by the way, most of the mice studies don't show that. So when you feed these animals meat-based diets or heavier meat, and they never get a fully meat-based diet, they get a little bit of meat plus vegetable oil and some sugar in their bread to get cancer, and they're given pro-cancer medications to try to speed up the process, but they don't actually even develop cancer in most cases. They might show some early changes in their colon which may later go on to cancer, like there's something called a colonic crypt. And we see that actually there's studies out there that show it in a high fiber diets also induce these colonic crypts, but we don't hear about that because the epidemiology doesn't match that. So there's mechanisms for anything to show cancer. I can show you lots of mechanisms why broccoli causes cancer, or why things like I think it's celery or something. I mean, there's lots of studies that show certain vegetables mechanistically can cause cancer. So those are there. The problem is the epidemiology doesn't support it. So then your argument sort of revolves around epidemiology. And so the problem with epidemiology is, unless the risk that you demonstrate is something like 100%, and this is something called the Bradford Hill criteria, unless you can show that there's a doubling in the incidence of, whatever condition, red meat causes cancer 100% more than if you don't. And the problem is you never show that. You show, like the World Health Organization they demonstrated something. They said it was a 17% risk. So that's really kind of clinically meaningless. But more importantly, if we all know that correlation doesn't cause causation. I mean, I think most people in the nutrition space have heard this enough. And so if I say, Kevin Bacon movies are associated with drowning in the summer, and you're going to say, well, that's just stupid. Even though it's just a correlation, it doesn't mean.
I think they actually are, though.
Well, maybe they are, but I mean, but then we look at this and then we say, well, if that correlation is true, if we're going to impart causation on this, and remember, when we looked at smoking and said smoking is causative in lung cancer, it wasn't a 17% increase. It was a 2,000% increase. It was a 3,000% increase. It was overwhelmingly, convincingly positive that you can say that. So you can even start to do that. But so if we look at the other studies, so in Western populations, and where most of this epidemiology is done, in the United States, in the UK, people that eat more meat show a slight increase in colorectal cancer based on epidemiology. But if you go to Asia's got 4.5 billion people, and you do the same studies on Asians, there's no relationship whatsoever to red meat and colorectal cancer. Because, and my assumption is because when Americans eat meat, most Americans that are meat eaters have been told meat is bad for you. And so if you're going to continue to eat meat, you're kind of an unhealthy person in the first place. You're going to go to McDonald's and get your burger with your French fries cooked in vegetable oil. You're going to drink the Coke. You're going to have the Frosty at Wendy's. You're going to eat your hot apple pie, which is, just vegetable oil and sugar and a bunch of other garbage. So this is the difference. So when we look at Asians, they don't get colorectal cancer, on any relationship with red meat or even processed meat. Doesn't matter if it's cooked, doesn't matter if it's raw. And so, what is it unique about Asian people? Are they genetically protected from getting colorectal cancer? And the answer is no, because when they move to the United States, guess what happens to their colorectal cancer incidence? It goes straight back up. So it's a Western diet in general. It's not the meat part of the diet. And so that's how, when I look at that, and again, let's just assume that let's just assume the epidemiology is right. And yes, there's a 17% increased risk of colorectal cancer from eating red meat. Okay. That means an absolute risk. It takes your lifetime risk from 4% to 5%. So it's a 1% increase in risk. So it's really small. It's like, okay, I'm 1% more likely to get colorectal cancer. Okay, I'm willing to take that chance because I really like eating steak. Okay, but even if we assume that that risk is real, and it very likely isn't, then you have to say, well, what other things are out there that can cause colorectal cancer or can be associated with colorectal cancer? Because remember, it's not just one thing. It's not like the only reason people get colorectal cancer is because they eat meat.
Exactly.
Bigger things are visceral body fat. So if you've got a bunch of belly fat, you got a bunch of liver fat or pancreas fat hanging around, your risk is going to go up not 17%, but something like 300%. So then we're like, okay, well, what happens what about hyperinsulinemia? If your insulin's out of control, guess what happens? Your colorectal risk goes up another couple 100%. What happens if you have chronic inflammation? Guess what? Colorectal risk goes up. What happens if you have irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis? The last two, the Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, your colorectal cancer risk may go up 2,000, 3,000%. So then we look at what happens to people that are eating meat-only diets to their visceral body fat. They typically get leaner. Their insulin typically gets better. Their inflammatory markers typically get better. And this is what I see over and over again. If they have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or even IBS, those things all get better. So if those things are all getting better, guess what's happening to your colorectal cancer risk? It's dramatically dropping, even if you still believe that tiny 17% risk is still part of the equation. And so I think you got to look at the overall package with that. And so that's how I look at colorectal cancer risk. And I think we have to. The problem is we become very reductionist. You can't be reductionist about health. Health is so complicated. There's so many factors that go into that.